Yeah, I'm going to give it another minute. I'm texting a couple of people.
I cannot hear anyone speaking. I assume nobody is talking, but if somebody is trying, I just wanted you to know that can't hear anybody yet.
Thanks, Jay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, we're just waiting. There were for a few more people to join. I think Chuck's texting some people. We'll get started. I appreciate you being on time.
Oh, Bill.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Did you get my text?
Just seen it. I was just trying to get here, Chuck.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
How's your weather, Bill?
Cold. I think we warmed up a bit. Now we're 3 below.
Okay, we were that this morning. We made it to 22, I think now.
Kathleen, I'm here. I got my times mixed up.
Welcome, Kathleen.
Hello.
Recording in progress.
Okay, well, I guess we get started. 11 minutes past 1 o'clock. If somebody comes in late, they can watch the recording. I'm Chuck Gabbert, the founder of TAPS and the project manager of legislation being drafted by our group. It's called the AMP Act. And we've been writing the AMP Act for about a year now with the help from cow-calf producers all across America. And we hope the bill to be introduced in the House of Representatives in January. And the AMP Act contains 9 titles that we believe is going to bring back a competitive market to our industry and renew the livelihood of our producers. The AMP Act will also eliminate the manipulation of the supply chain and the exploitation of the beef consumers. We appreciate all the work everybody's done in the last year to finish this up. Right now, it's in review with the experts, and we hope to have a bow on it by Christmas time and ready to release it in January. The purpose of today's meeting is we want to welcome the new TAPS members and the administrators and allow each to introduce themselves and hear what they have to say about the beef industry and what you guys think about the beef industry. And we also want to meet industry experts and hear comments about how the cattle industry has evolved in the current crisis that we're in now and practical solutions to avert a disaster. And these guys know what they're talking about, believe me. Every time we listen to them, we learn something new. I'd like to introduce now Angie Mormon. She's a TAPS Communications Director, and allow her to discuss the need for the state administrators and how you can help. And then Angie will introduce our first contributor. Angie.
Thanks, Chuck. Hi, Angie Mormon here. We have a cow-calf operation in southern Missouri, and we are excited for the legislation to be done and get in there so that we can get back to being able to choose American beef and give customers, which we think are really important, a choice, and to bring money back into the pockets of Americans who are supplying the beef. One thing I wanted to go over with several things with the directors. I know a lot of people have asked about it and thought maybe it was a really heavy job to do, but really it's just networking, which we do every day, whether it's talking about movies or books or where we get our feed or the, cheapest hay, best hay. It's the same thing with the TAPS group. We're just talking to people about what our goals are and getting them involved, and not only cow-calf producers, but consumers, because there are way more consumers out there than cow-calf producers. And so in order to do that, we've set up state directors, which you guys are a part of. And so you can involve your state. I've seen a lot of people want to get involved, but because it's Texas or Oklahoma and they're in Michigan, and not, they're like, well, I want someone in my group. So we have the similar things to talk about and be in the same state and such. So that's why we decided to go with state directors. And so part of your job is just getting people involved and getting people on your group so that we can get information to them, so you can get information to them, to network through each other, because you never know who knows somebody. And we've found that is that's a big thing. We've found media people doing that and journalists. And so, you know, you can be thinking while you're on the call and making notes on, you know, who do I know who might know somebody or who do I know that is somebody. Also, another thing is reaching out to your senators and representatives. We have basically letters that we can personalize to your senator or representative and then adjust however it needs to fit. So you don't have to write a letter yourself. Here to help you with that. And our goal is to get on, to have Zoom meetings with those reps and educate them, because a lot of them do not know what's going on right now in America. So I've sent out some information more on that. And if you have any questions or ideas, be sure to send them to us. We're very open and very teachable. And I think with that, I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker today. He's going to explain how we got where we're at and hopefully what it's going to take to get out of it. And so, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you and welcome. So you're involved in the single largest segment of American agriculture, the live cattle industry, cash receipts somewhere around $67 billion. And you're a very diverse industry. We've got hundreds of thousands of cow-calf producers and backgrounders and stockers. And we have about 27,000 feedlots that altogether represent the live cattle supply chain. Now, in a competitive marketplace like we once had, you had the forces of competition would allocate to the live cattle segment their competitive share of the revenues generated from the sales of beef. And what has happened in our industry, if we try to distill down this diverse and complicated industry down to what is the problem and when did it occur, you know, we go back a couple decades ago and we know that the 4 largest packers ate up all the other packers, all the small to medium-sized packers. And when they did that, they captured a dominant market share. They created a bottleneck, and they created what is called market access risk, because the packers could then decide who does and who does not have timely access to the marketplace. This happened back in the 90s when they reached a concentration level of about 80%. 4 packers control 80% of the market and had the ability to control who had timely access. Well, at about the same time, consumption of beef in America began to increase and did so for well over a decade. And so the packers, though they possessed this ability to create market access risk, didn't use it because they needed more cattle to satisfy the increasing demands for beef. And that occurred, you know, from the late 90s all the way up till about 2012. But after that, the packers began to experiment with how could they leverage their dominant market position and increase their margins. And what they experimented with was called a formula contract. Rather than purchasing cattle in that competitive market that once allocated competitive shares to everybody along the supply chain, the packers began to develop these formula contracts, formula prices that remove cattle out of the price discovery market, place them in formula contracts, and yet the base price of those cattle was tied right back to that shrinking cash market, the price competitive market. So we saw over time that the packers began shifting large volumes of cattle out of the price discovery market, out of the cash market, and placing them in these formula contracts that we'll call captive supplies. They're cattle committed to the packer. The producer is guaranteed timely access. It solves their market access risk because they have guaranteed timely access to the market. The only thing they don't know is what the price will be. And the price is based on a formula that, again, is tied back to this residual cash market. And so the effect of what the packers did was they shifted the risk of purchasing cattle from themselves to the residual cash market and everyone who participates in it. And most recent study that was just completed shows that the price difference between the cattle sold in the cash market versus those sold in this formula market are about the same. And that makes sense because the base price of the formula contracts are tied to the cash market And then you apply both premiums and discounts. And when you average it out, the two prices are relatively constant. They're about the same. The difference, however, is that all the shift of the risk of the marketplace has been shifted away from the packers and to the producers. So now we have a situation where we have far less competitive forces functioning within the marketplace. And the outcome of that is we have a dysfunctional market. We have consumers that for years have been paying super inflated prices for beef. And yet cattle producers for years until relatively recently have been receiving seriously depressed prices. So there's been a complete disconnect between the demand for cattle and the demand for beef. Demand for beef has been extremely high, driving prices up. Yet the demand for cattle has been restricted to the point that the packers could procure their cattle using the leverage they've gained through formula contracts. They could avoid the cash market, the price discovery market. And by virtue of them jumping in and out of that cash market, they create lower prices and they create increased risk for the producers. So we've seen 75% of our independent producers have vanished. They've exited the industry just over the past 25 years. We once had 113,000 feedlots in our industry. We're now down to 27,000. We wiped out 75% of them. So now all of the people participating in the base of this industry, cow-calf producers and stock rounders, they have fewer market outlets for the cattle that they produce. And as a result, you have fewer buyers, lots of sellers, and you have a situation that's dysfunctional. So the problem is clear. The problem is that the packers were successful in purging competition out of the live cattle supply chain at the juncture where the fed cattle are sold directly to the packers. And because of that, we have a situation where you don't know what your cattle prices are going to be unless there's a disaster or a huge economic shock, a severe shock to the system. We're in that right now. That's why cattle prices are increasing. It's because we've had widespread drought. The supplies of cattle are at a historical low, almost as low as they were just in 2014. At that time, that was a 7-decade low. We hadn't had so few mother cows in the US beef cow herd in 2014 for over 70 years. Well, we're almost there again. And as a result of this extremely tight supply situation, the latent forces of competition that still exist in our marketplace are able to flourish and exhibit the competitive forces in the market. That's why we're seeing fat cattle prices increasing, and that's why these lighter weight cattle are, following suit. But this is temporary. We've had this happen 3 times in the past 30 years. We had it occur first when the Canadian border was closed because of BSE. We cut off about 5 to 6% of the available live cattle that packers had. And that was sufficient in our supply sensitive industry to allow these competitive forces to exist. The first time in history back then, back in 2003 and 4, we saw fat cattle prices rise to over $100. We've never had that in our industry before. Then it happened again after 2011 to 2013, widespread drought in the United States. Cattle herd size fell to the lowest numbers in decades, and that allowed these latent forces to occur in the marketplace, and we saw cattle prices rise to the highest nominal prices in history. And then as soon as the disaster, the severe shock was over, so too were the high cattle prices. And we saw depressed cattle prices for 8 years, and now we're in the third event, the third severe economic shock that is driving cattle prices up, and you're benefiting from it. But it won't last. This is very, very temporary. And so that's what the AMP Act recognizes, is that for the past 40 decades, while our industry has been suffering from a lack of competition in the industry, all of the reform proposals submitted to Congress has been completely ignored. The only solution Congress has offered for the past 40 years was let's enter more free trade agreements, because free trade agreements will expand potential market access for US beef. By doing so, you would increase beef demand. When you increase beef demand, you will create prosperity for all the independent producers in the industry. It's not occurring now. With consumers paying record prices for beef, cattle prices have been distorted and severely depressed for 8 years. And it's because the marketplace itself is dysfunctional. And so while exports have reached all-time highs, your cattle prices haven't been responsive to those increased export volumes. And that's because the market is fundamentally broke. So the AMP Act recognizes that, pulls together all of the past efforts to try to reform the marketplace, to restore competition, puts it in an omnibus type package that can be presented to Congress and represents a comprehensive reform for the industry. So it focuses on competition. Number one, how do you create competition at the grocery store? Well, you let consumers choose whether or not to buy beef that's exclusively born and raised in the United States, or they could buy the cheaper beef that's being procured from 20 different countries around the world. And of course, those increased supplies available through imports allow the beef packers, again, to leverage down domestic prices. So country of origin labeling is critical in order to restore competition. Then you've got to force those packers who have figured out how not to compete in the marketplace to once again begin competing amongst each other for available cattle. So the AMP Act, for example, would prohibit these formula contracts that are tied to the residual marketplace that shift the risk away from the packers and to the producers. And it requires the packers to purchase a certain volume, 50% level in the cash market. It addresses the problem of the packers jumping in and out of that cash market at will in order to manage their profit margins. So those are just two examples, but it goes further than that. It addresses the national security interests that the United States has for an affordable and abundant supply of beef in the United States, and recognizes that we've got, foreign interests that are buying up some of our critical processing facilities, and that threatens our national security. And then it recognizes that we do have to increase packer capacity. We have to provide more opportunities for producers, more marketing outlets, and it supports the smaller packers' ability to grow and expand, and particularly across state lines, in order to create more demand for USA cattle. So I'll just stop there. That's about 10 minutes, and happy to answer any questions as we go forward. So thank you, Angie.
Bill, could you elaborate a little bit on formula contracts?
So formula contracts are contracts that commit cattle to a packer at a certain point in the future. And the price is not negotiated. The price is simply determined through a formula that ties itself directly to the residual cash market. So as large volumes of cattle get removed from the cash market and are held in these committed cattle, we call them captive supplies, the packers can use those cattle strategically in order to avoid having to enter the cash market at times when prices are rallying, for example. And by avoiding the cash market, having fewer buyers in the cash market, they can cause prices to decline several dollars per hundredweight, $3 to $5 per hundredweight, simply because the packers aren't participating in the marketplace. And the beauty for them is when that occurs, when we see a decline in the cash market, that means a decline for all the cattle that are committed to them through the formula contracts, because again, the base price is tied to that residual marketplace. And so rather than having to compete on a daily basis, on a real-time basis, and establish a competitive value for cattle, they figured out a way to game the system. They figured out how to manage the value of cattle and to rely upon a cash market that is now so thin, down around 20%. 20% of the cattle are sold in the cash market, yet they're the base price for 100% of the cattle that the packers procure. They game the system by avoiding competition, ensuring a steady supply of cattle into their packing plants, and ensuring their ability to prevent cattle price rallies from occurring or lasting very long, and managing their profit levels. So they've taken, the studies show that they've transferred the risk away from themselves with the formula contracts to the cash market. But more than that, they've afforded themselves the ability to manage the prices of cattle. And we've seen that now for the past many years.
Is that a violation of any laws or do you know?
Well, so you've got the 100-year-old Packers and Stockyards Act that prohibits packers from engaging in any conduct that is deceptive, unfair, or unjustly discriminatory or prejudicial. And so you could conclude that this practice itself is unfair or deceptive or discriminatory, and therefore a violation of the Packers and Stockyards Act. We actually tried to get the USDA to adopt that theory. They haven't done that. They claim that, well, the courts have said the packers can engage in this practice so long as they have a competitive business reason, justification for doing so. And so we've gotten nowhere there. So the solution is yet to rely on the statute that says it's unfair and deceptive, but then we need rules by USDA to clarify what practices are deemed to be unfair and deceptive. And we're hopeful that the rulemaking process that's going on now, we're going to see some proposed rules soon after the first of the year, hopefully. And we're hopeful that those proposed rules will do just that, Chuck. They will clarify that the use of the formula contracts are inherently anti-competitive and harmful to the economic interests of independent cattle producers, and therefore deemed to be an unfair or deceptive act or practice, and prohibited by the Packers and Stockyards Act. But the first step is to get the rules written that would actually clarify that.
Does anybody else have any questions for Bill?
I
Bill,
do.
this is, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mike. Was that Mike? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You go ahead.
So I'm new to some of these industry details, and I'm still trying to learn. So my understanding of what you said, one component anyways, is that the Packers' ability to change the direction of the market or stop these rallies in price, if they didn't have that ability, we could potentially rally back to a much higher price, and just those couple dollars per hundredweight is enough to stop that momentum. Is that accurate?
So the question would be, so what is the actual value of a live animal when beef prices are well over $7 a pound right now? It's far higher than $155 fat cattle, for sure. And so a competitive marketplace would restore us back to when those competitive forces, the demand for beef would translate directly for the demand for cattle. And as a result of the invisible hand of competition, you would see a competitive price for cattle and a price for beef that's determined by consumer demand. So your prices would yet fluctuate as consumer demand for beef did, but it would be connected. And it was connected for decades leading up to 2015. There's always been a harmonious relationship between the price of cattle and the price of beef. That disconnected in 2015. We saw cattle prices stair-stepping downward beginning in 2017, sharply downward. We saw retail beef prices exploding to all-time record highs. That's never occurred in our industry to the extent that we saw it happen here over the past 8 years. So the answer is, it could well be, $3-5 a hundredweight would make the difference, but that would be dependent on what the demand and price of beef is. The important thing is that the glue that once connected these two price points together is gone. It's been eliminated in the marketplace. Now we need to restore it. We need to restore that relationship between retail beef prices and cattle prices. And obviously, there's other ways of doing this. We want the competitive forces in the marketplace to do it. We want it to be competitive as opposed to being regulated. And so we're going to have to regulate the behavior and the conduct of the packers that have interfered with those competitive market forces in order to bring them back. But we're not going to peg the price of your cattle to the price of beef and say your cattle prices have to be, so many dollars per hundredweight less than the price of beef, and that would be fair. We'd rather the competitive marketplace made that determination.
So there's a lead time between something that's live on the field and something that is in the butcher case. If I'm explaining to somebody what we're trying to accomplish, and they push back a little bit and say, okay, at what stage in the supply chain is someone shouldering the risk in between the live animal and the butcher showcase? Who is that should shoulder that risk? And I'm not criticizing where we're headed. I'm trying to play devil's advocate so that I understand
Right.
how to explain that to somebody.
So you would want to achieve a balance. There is risk in a competitive marketplace. We're not taking the risk away, but the risk should be shared amongst the participants in the marketplace. And that's what's occurred now, is the risk that you bear as a seller of cattle it has been increased exponentially because the packers have so significantly reduced their risk. So the risk would be 1 and 1. You should each have a risk in the marketplace for the vagaries of the market and the changes in consumer demand. But that doesn't occur now. Right now, the risk has been transferred to you. Good questions.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else?
Chuck, I might add, Mike Schultz here. I might add with what Bill's saying, Jay, so you kind of understand. A lot of the feed yard guys that we're involved with they're trying to buy shackle space. And that's created the contract formula issue because of a non-competitive market. So in order to get your cattle sold, you have to be aligned or tied to somebody. It's very seldom out here in Northwest Kansas that you get more than one buyer to buy cattle. And my example is in Colorado right now, they have the rule with the price reporting is a 370-20 rule. And if you understand the 370-20 rule, let me pull this up here a minute. Maybe I can give it to you exactly. Thought I had that here a minute ago. You have to have 3 buyers, and any buyer can't buy more than 70% of the market because it's under a confidentiality clause, and it's all bogus. Because people that know if somebody buys 5,000 head of cattle or 6,000 or 10,000 one week, those few packers that are involved in that, they know who's buying the cattle, but they don't want us to know, basically is what it amounts to. So I've been opposed to the 370-20 rule. Today, and Bill can explain more about this, is Colorado doesn't participate in livestock price reporting because they have only a single buyer. So we don't know what the cattle in Colorado are bringing, which makes it an unfair deal to the people that are selling out there. And I had, over the years, I've had people in Canada tell me when we were arguing for these issues, well, Mike, in our area, we only have one buyer. It was Cargill at the time. He goes, we don't have any competition either. So our argument with some of our issues with MCOOL, ban on packer ownership, is not to put the producers on each side of the border at odds. It's to raise awareness to the fact that they have no competition either. So when we talk about MCOOL, when we seen the price rally, the Canadian market rallied with ours because we're the price leaders. Mexican cattle market rallied with ours. And when they defeated the MCOOL rule through the WTO, their markets crashed just like ours. It's almost a mirrored concept. And I've got those charts and we can share them with you guys so that you have that. And as Bill talked about the money that's taken off the table by the lower prices, when I was in the livestock price reporting meetings, the packers said, you can get all the data you want. We have people in the market every day studying it. And so we're in the market when it's down and we're out of the market when it's up. And so because of so few buyers, you're kind of limited. If they have captive cattle, they can fill that supply chain to keep those processing plants open. That used to be an argument that the packers had for captive supply cattle, is we have to keep our plants open. Our point is they could pay more money. So another point to address the packers relationship is you'll hear them say, well, the Packers just don't make any money. And you may hear that over a period of time. And I've always said, if they don't make any money, let's turn them into a custom slaughter plant. We pay guys out here $1 a pound to process beef. And then you retain ownership all the way to the retail. You think they'd allow you to do that?
No.
They won't allow you to do that because there's too much money on the retail side. So just a few points. I could get into more, but that's kind of narrow that down a little bit. Okay.
I know what we just talked about is counter to everything you read in your beef publications. You know, you're told how well things are going with these formula contracts. They return, you know, higher prices for higher quality cattle, as if neither the buyer nor the seller knows the quality of an animal on the hoof. You know, that's been part of our industry forever. But the reality is that these contracts, formula contracts, are harmful. Georgetown University recently issued a publication, a study, revealing that as these formula contracts increase, for each 1% of increase, they decrease cattle prices by over 5%. And there's a direct correlation there between increased volumes of formula contracts and reduced prices paid to cattle producers. We know the contracts are harmful. There's economists that have supported the Packers that have conducted studies and said, yes, but we've made the market more efficient. The largeness of scale of the Packers have allowed them to produce beef cheaper than anyone else could. And we've created efficiencies in the marketplace. And all the while that argument is held today, we've been seeing producers drop from our industry like flies. We've lost over 40% of the cattle producers in business just over a generation ago are gone today. And I've already said about the reduction in the number of independent cattle feeders, and we're losing them on a daily basis.
So Bill, if this is an okay time, you seem very knowledgeable, and I'm curious what your background is and what your motivation is getting involved here.
I'm a former cow-calf producer from South Dakota. Used to have a 300 head cow-calf operation. Left in the 80s during the economic cost price squeeze back at that time. So I've made full circle. For the past 2 decades, I've been representing independent cattle producers as the CEO of R-CALF USA.
Thank you.
Bill, give us some ideas, because I've been running into this Chuck, a lot with folks that just don't know what's going on. And that's including the elected officials. And do you see that? I mean,
Absolutely. They've been conditioned to look the other way. They've been conditioned to believe that efficiency trumps competition, and that so long as the marketplace is efficient, we're not concerned about the loss of producers. And they can point to the poultry and hog industries in which the number of participants have been reduced significantly. The hog industry, you know, closely related to the cattle industry in terms of you've got, well, we don't produce litters, but you still have the, you know, the sow phase comparable to the cow-calf. Then you have a feeding stage, and then you have sold to the packer. Well, a little over a generation ago, we had 665,000 independent hog producers scattered all across the United States. They can market their hogs at virtually every local auction yard. And in the course of just 40 years, we've wiped out 9 out of every 10 of them, only 10% less in the country. So we know that when the packers begin to control an industry, the first thing they do is reduce the number of participants because they don't want to have to mess with all of these pesky producers. And the first way they did that in the hog industry, they eliminated the cash market. That cash market in the hog industry fell from, you know, a relatively high number down to 5% today. Some weeks it's 0. On an annual average, it's somewhere around 3 to 5%. So they eliminated the outlets for independent producers to gain access to the marketplace unless they were tied to the packers through some type of vertical integration agreement, production contracts, marketing contracts. So they did the same thing in the hog industry that they're applying to our industry. The only difference is ours is harder to do that too, because we don't produce litters, because we have the longest biological cycle of any farmed animal. It takes 3 years to change, to respond to changes in supplies or changes in demand. And we require vast amounts of forage, you know, for the early stages, at least the first half of the animal's life. And so it's in the concentrated feedlot that the packers are focused. Right now, they're trying to control the feedlot segment because that's the segment that is most conducive to corporate control and dominance of the industry. And that's what we're seeing now. And that's why we're seeing so many of our farmer feeders exit the industry.
When you say 3 to 5% of the market, can you explain that?
Would I say what now?
We're talking about, you're seeing 3 to 5% of the market.